In this week's lecture, we're going to be discussing the philosophical discipline of epistemology. As the class has gone so far, where we are, what we've been discussing, we've covered the laws of thought, where we talked about the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and the law of excluded middle. And that led us to thinking about different kinds of arguments that, within the realms of possibility, we distinguished two different kinds of arguments, deductive and inductive arguments, and discussed about what makes a deductive argument good, namely its validity, and what makes an inductive argument good, namely its strength. We discussed a number of different kinds of fallacies, both deductive fallacies and inductive fallacies. And at this point, we've covered a certain sort of sub-aspect of formal logic, where we discussed how one might symbolize certain kinds of logical, sentences that have logical terms in them, how to do truth tables for those logical connectives, and how to test an argument for validity, that is, a deductive validity, using the truth table method. In the rest of this class, we still have a few more, hopefully more interesting things to come, and a little bit less technical in some respects, but technical in other respects. And these topics include epistemology, or the study of knowledge, which is what this lecture will be about, issues in statistical and probabilistic reasoning, different kinds of cognitive biases and how to avoid them, and then critical thinking about science, the scientific method, and what differentiates sort of doing good research and theorizing from doing things that are forms of quackery. What exactly do you think that you know? I mean, clearly most of what you believe and what you know coincide, right? I believe that my car is in the parking lot outside, and I know that my car is in the parking lot outside. I believe that my dog is named Joey, and I know that my dog is named Joey. I believe that the Central Coast of California is the best place to live on Earth, and I know that the Central Coast of California is the best place to live on Earth. But sometimes what we believe and what we know come apart. Suppose one day I park my car in a lot on campus, but unbeknownst to me, I've parked in a lot that's about to be resurfaced. They're gonna pour some new asphalt. Now, I believe that my car is in the lot, of course, right? I have good reason to do so. I drove it there, I parked it there, I left it there. There aren't many thieves around. But my car now has been towed. So now, of course, in this case, I believe that my car is in the lot, but my belief is wrong. My car is no longer in the lot. So, do I know that my car is in the lot? No, of course not, right? I can't know that my car is in the lot if my car is not in the lot. Even if I still believe that it's in the lot, that doesn't change the fact that it's not there. And so it's not possible for me to know that it's in the lot. Merely believing something, then, is not enough to know something. What you believe has to be true. But is merely having a true belief enough to know something, to have knowledge? It seems not. There are lots of situations in which someone might have a true belief, but not actually know anything. Like, imagine somebody that's got a mental illness and is insane. They might have true beliefs once in a while, right? Even while they're believing, like imagine somebody that believes that he's Napoleon Bonaparte. He may, randomly believe some correct things about Napoleon Bonaparte's life, even though, those are just caused by his insanity. Similarly, there's the possibility of inception in like a more sci-fi style movie thing. Somebody could implant a belief into your head. That belief could be true, but That doesn't seem like you know it, given that it's been implanted. Or, something even dumber, right? You get hit on the head by a falling tree branch, and then all of a sudden you come to believe the number, that you come to believe that there's a particular number of people currently living in New York City. Well, that could be a true belief that you have, but it doesn't seem that you would know how many people were living in New York City merely on the basis of being hit in the head and coming to, ardently hold to that piece of information. These situations are just cases of true beliefs, but in each of these cases, it doesn't seem like you would actually know anything in the more interesting sense of know. Now, the disconnect in each of these cases is that, coming to have a belief through some sort of random process just isn't enough for knowledge. The processes by which we come to have the beliefs that we have need to be structured in the right kind of way. They need to work in the right kind of way. We need to come to believe things in the right sort of way for those things to ultimately be knowledge. One way of thinking about this is that you need to have a good reason for the belief that you have for it to be knowledge, right? You need to think like, oh, I saw this with my own two eyes. That's a good reason for believing it. I was told this by someone that's trustworthy. That's a good reason for believing it. I left my car in the parking lot this morning. That's a good reason for believing that it's still there. And yet, is having true belief based on reasons enough to have knowledge? Well, maybe not. Suppose that, back in my car example, that a tow truck driver has towed my car. The tow truck driver, as he's beginning to tow my car, he gets a call from his wife. There's an emergency back at home, and so he needs to rush there. Well, he can't do that with my car in tow, so he drops my car in a different part of the parking lot, cuts it loose, and it's outside of the resurfacing zone, so nobody's going to tow it. So in this funny addition to the case, right, I'm still believing that my car is in the lot. And my car is in the lot. So I have this true belief that my car is in the lot. And I have a pretty good reason for believing that my car is in the lot, right? I left it in the lot and didn't, it seems like, okay, so I have a good reason for believing my car is in the lot. I have a true belief that my car is in the lot. But it seems like I don't know that my car is in the lot in this case, right? Because my reason for believing that my car is in the lot is sort of wrong. I missed all of this other stuff that happened to my car in the meantime. And there are lots of cases that you can imagine that would be sort of like this. Let's just take a couple. Imagine a situation where you look out into a big field and you see something that looks like a sheep, and you think, oh, look, there's a sheep in the field over there. And as it turns out, the thing that you're looking at is actually a very big rock that looks like a sheep. However, unbeknownst to you, there is a sheep just on the other side of the rock. Now, in this case, right, you see this rock, think it's a sheep. You come to believe on the basis of that there's a sheep in the field. The thing looks like a sheep, right? So you have like a good reason for thinking that there's a sheep in the field. And there is a sheep in the field. Well, in this case, you've got a true belief, and it seems like you've got a good reason for believing what you believe. But nobody wants to say that you know in this case, right? Nobody wants to say that you know that there's a sheep in the field, because you've got it in the wrong way, right? You came to your belief sort of in a problematic, confusing, you've got the wrong reason in a way. The reason is sort of set up wrong. Similarly, right, imagine you make coffee in the morning, and you have yourself a cup and you expect there to be more coffee in the pot. You go back to your desk, and in the meantime, right, your roommate drinks the rest of the coffee and makes a new pot of coffee. Now you go back to the coffee pot for your second cup, and expecting there to be coffee in the pot, and it turns out that there's coffee in the pot. But your belief is based on the reason for your belief is that you made the coffee initially, right? You didn't know that your roommate was going to drink all of the rest of the coffee and make more. And so in this kind of case, the fact that you have a true belief that there's coffee in the pot, and a good reason for believing that there's coffee in the pot, it just doesn't seem to add up to a case in which you actually know anything. You can try and come up with one of these on your own. Basically, all you have to do is come up with a situation in which you have a true belief, and it's sort of an accident that your belief is true, while you still have a good reason for believing what it is that you believe, but the accident kind of foils the reason that you have. So what exactly then does it take to know anything at all? Well, philosophers tend to call whatever it takes that gets you from merely having a true belief to having knowledge, warrant. That is, in certain situations, you can be warranted in your beliefs by being in a position to know what your beliefs are about. If you have a belief and that belief is true, and you have a good reason for that belief, and then there's nothing else that's sort of in the way of that belief, then your belief is warranted. But what exactly is warrant? There's lots of different options, lots of different suggestions that philosophers have given. Evidence, true evidence, evidence in the absence of defeaters, reliability, etc. But we know that there are at least these sort of necessary conditions on knowledge. Whatever it is that you know, you have to believe. It has to be true. You need some kind of good reason good reason that justifies the belief that you have, and you need a connection between the justification of the belief and the truth of the belief. Most, or a lot of philosophers, spend a bunch of their time working in epistemology, debating the nature of this sort of justification or warrant. And there's a couple of different views that are sort of interesting and worth dragging out here to sort of help learn a lesson. One of the views of people that worry about justification are called the internalists. And the internalists believe that in order to be justified in holding to any belief that you have, you need to have a good reason for it, right? You need to have a good reason for your belief, but you need to also believe that reason. Like, you need to have it before your mind. You need to know, right? You need to be like, I don't know, why do I believe that my car is in the parking lot? Well, because, I parked it there. I remember, right? I know this. I have this reason before my mind. And that reason needs to provide some good evidential support for the belief to count as justification. And then there can be no defeaters that you know about in the sort, available to your mind. A defeater is basically any other belief or statement that if you sort of knew it, if you had thought it, or if you believed that maybe it was plausible or possible, then it would undercut the support that the original reason gives, right? So suppose you're at the field and you see the sheep-shaped rock and you believe that there are sheep in the field, right? That in a normal situation, that's it. And, so you come to have this belief that there's a sheep in the field. But in another scenario, if you knew that there were lots of sheep-shaped rocks in the area that you were in, that would be a defeater, right? You wouldn't form the belief that that's a sheep, because you know that it's, might be a rock, right? Because you know that there are lots of rocks that look like that. On the other hand, there are externalists, opposite of the internalists, and they think, look, you don't really have to have this belief, this internal access to your reasoning as much. What you need is just to be connected up to in the right sort of way to how the world is. And if you're connected up in the right sort of way to how the world is, then your belief can be knowledge. And one version of externalism that's common these days is called reliabilism. Reliabilism is basically the idea that your beliefs and the truth just need to be connected up in a sort of reliable way. Your beliefs should be reliably true, and how your beliefs are produced should be reliable in giving you true beliefs. So the thought here is supposed to be something like, look, you don't have reasons for believing what your eyes tell you, right? Like maybe you do believe something about like how vision works and that it's a good belief forming method. But when you were a kid, you didn't believe anything about how perception worked, and yet you believed all of the beliefs that your eyes kind of formed in you, right? You saw a dog in front of you, you believed that that was a dog, right? But there was this sort of reliable method that was followed where your eyes caused your brain to do something, and then somehow a belief popped in there. Externalists think, okay, look, yeah, you can just come to know in that way, as long as there's this good connection, this reliable connection, this special connection between the truth of reality and the beliefs in your head. Then as long as that connection exists, then yeah, you can know what you think. Now, everyone in this debate between the internalists and externalists recognizes that truth matters, that the truth is like really, really important, when it comes to what you believe. And they all think that we need to stand in some sort of special relationship to the truth in order to know anything at all. And then the debate is over what exactly that relationship is. The problem here, at least for our purposes, is that most of the time, this condition on whether or not our beliefs are true is actually outside of our control. Imagine the following scenario. Well into the future seeming of what it is currently, we invent artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence determines that humans are, poorly designed and, not good. And so the artificial intelligence, Skynet or whatever, decides to enslave the human race in order to farm us as batteries. If you've seen the movie The Matrix, you'll understand what I'm getting at. These artificial intelligent robots enslave the humans, plug us all into a giant computer mainframe, and using special technology are able to, in a sense, project a world, the current world that we seemingly see right now, into our brains and make it seem as if everything that we are feeling, tasting, touching, and existing in is just how it seems to us now. In this world, the reality is it's a dark robot-run world, but there's a lot of human beings that are just kind of stuck, plugged into the Matrix. Now, in this world, one of the sort of tricks here is that you don't know that you're in the Matrix. And the thing that's supposed to sort of follow from this is that you currently, like not imagining this anymore, you currently, where you're sitting, don't know that you are not in the Matrix, right? How could you know, right? Everything that you're seeing, down to the minute details on your computer screen right now, would be exactly the same, right? Unless there was some sort of glitch, there would be no way of ever testing whether or not you were in the Matrix. And given the idea that you are in the Matrix, if you were in the Matrix, the truth of many of your beliefs would simply just not be under your control. You would be being fooled into believing all kinds of things, right? Like that you're looking at your hand, that you're looking at your computer screen, right? That you are living in the year 2022 or something like, all of these things would be incorrect. But none of that would be your fault, right? These beliefs that you would have been fooled into having would have been someone else's fault, or just, they wouldn't have been the kinds of things that you would believe had you actually been presented with different evidence. And so there's something of a lesson to pull here, While the skeptical hypothesis is this sort of like extreme and very unlikely scenario, it does give us a lesson. And that lesson is something like this. If you're being fooled in the matrix, aren't there still going to be things that you sort of ought to believe given the evidence that you're being presented with? So like, the matrix probably isn't happening. But imagine someone in the matrix, like Neo, if you've seen the movie, and everything seems like it normally seems to him at the moment. Well, if that were the case, aren't there a bunch of things that Neo should believe, right? Aren't there a bunch of things that you should believe, even if ultimate reality is such that we are stuck in the matrix? So the idea here is like, if ultimately the truth of claims sort of doesn't matter, or is sort of out of your control, then the ultimate truth of claims sort of doesn't matter to whether or not you are thinking or believing well, whether or not you're doing a good job at critically thinking about things and believing about things. Whether you're doing a good job at critical thinking is going to depend on something else, something other than the ultimate truth. There's going to be something like a difference between failing to believe what's true and failing to be doing a good job at determining what you should believe or shouldn't believe. And that's the point here, is that like, even if skepticism is true, like extreme skepticism, and we're all being fooled by some artificially intelligent robots, that doesn't change the rules of critical thinking. That doesn't change how it is that we should confront what we believe in the face of the evidence that we have. This takes us back to what many call the ethics of belief, or how you should act with respect to believing things. If the truth is outside of your control, you can still try to track the truth given whatever it is that you have available to you, right? Your evidence. If your evidence is sufficiently connected to the truth, then great, you're on to the truth. If the evidence that you're getting is, someone's trying to fool you with it, then okay, you're not tracking the truth, but you at least followed your evidence as best you could, and it's not going to be your fault that your evidence led you astray. Now, when we're trying to decide what to believe, we can come up against these sort of two principles. One principle is that we should try to believe everything that's true, and the other principle is to try to avoid believing anything that's false. You'd be surprised that these two principles are actually very different, because how you decide to follow them, which one you give more precedent, which one you give more weight, will really change what it is that you believe. So the question becomes something like, how risky are you willing to be when it comes to your beliefs, right? There's lots of practical issues and things like subjects, like the different subjects that you're thinking about and having beliefs about are going to matter. Different subjects have different payoffs for getting things right or getting things wrong, right? So when it comes to topics like believing in the Tooth Fairy or believing in Santa Claus or something like that, this is a very low stakes situation, very low stakes scenario. In this case, right, if you believe the wrong thing, right, you might be made fun of, right, as a child or something like that. But that's not a very high stakes situation. Believing in Santa Claus, that he exists, doesn't cause a lot of harm if you're wrong, right? So when it comes to this sort of realm of make-believe, believing all sorts of things might be fine in one sense, right? Whereas in other situations, like a high-stakes situation, suppose you're in the jungle and you believe that there's a tiger right behind you, right? Well, that's a high-stakes scenario, right? If you don't believe that thing, right, because you haven't heard the tiger, or there isn't enough evidence to prove conclusively that the tiger is there, right? You might die, you might get eaten if you are unwilling to accept the modicum of evidence that you've been given. And then, more often than not, things are in the middle, believing that some particular person is going to be better president than someone else. These things are, the stakes are in the middle because of how much effect these things actually have over you. The idea here then is supposed to be that, what matters more when things have higher value, that should help us determine what principle we should use, right? In situations of life and death, we should really try to avoid believing things that are false, right? Right? Because usually, if you believe that the, cliff is over there and you're wrong, then you're gonna fall, right? And that's very problematic. That's like a big deal, right? Whereas things that are much lower stakes in sort of how much they matter, right? Having good fun, playing make-believe, doing something imaginary. You can believe everything that you want in a sense, right? You can take a sort of yes and mentality where the idea is to sort of add more fun stuff to whatever it is that you're doing in that kind of context. Whether or not these kinds of things actually count as beliefs is, I think, questionable, but at the very least, you can sort of hopefully see the point. Whereas most things ultimately are somewhere in the middle. We want to balance this game of avoiding believing false things and believing as many true things as we have good reason to believe. And this leads us to what might be called an attempt to attain a sort of healthy level of skepticism. Now, there are lots of different things that people will tell you that you should believe, right? You're bombarded by these things all the time on television and any kind of media. But there are lots of things along these lines that people tell you to believe, but they're unable to give you good reasons for those beliefs. Things like that you should believe in God, that America is the greatest country on earth, that socialism is bad, or maybe even that Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time, even though he lost twice to Eli Manning in the Super Bowl, and Eli is not even the best of the Mannings. However, many of these kinds of beliefs are low stakes. They don't have a whole lot to do with how you currently are living your life. Belief in God on the side, that's a special case where the way that you live your life is somehow supposed to determine how you live your afterlife. But that's a further claim where you have to also believe that there's an afterlife for it to matter. Often people have sort of fervent, ardent beliefs in things that are low stakes when they lack a good amount of evidence, right? They don't really have good reasons for believing these things, but they choose to believe them fervently, and they like to pound their fist that you must believe this or something like that. Now, none of this means that these things should never be believed. Each of these things could turn out to be true, but that, there could be other reasons that people have for believing these things as well, right? Like their upbringing or their community or something like that. However, these low stakes things, sometimes the stakes get raised. And once the stakes get raised, things become a little bit more difficult. Take, for example, religious reasoning with respect to abortion rights. The control that a woman has over her body, and whether or not we think a fetus has certain basic human rights to life. These kinds of issues become more in focus, more high stakes, depending on what we allow people to believe without reason, right? So if someone just says, look, the Bible says human life is sacred, and that's why we need to not allow women to have abortions. And you ask them, well, why should I believe that? If they don't have reasons to help back that up, well, now we're starting to see where the rubber is going to meet the road. We're going to start to see where these things that initially, or at least in some contexts, are of low stakes, start to build, and they start to come up against things that really do matter. And so for these kinds of reasons, we should foster a healthy sort of skepticism. This healthy skepticism is usually sort of a justified basic starting point from which we can assess claims that people want us to believe, right? Particularly when the stakes are sort of middle to high. That is, and we can determine whether or not stakes are middle to high when they have an effect on your life in a sort of serious way, or the lives of others in any kind of important or serious way. And healthy skepticism, again, is not extreme skepticism. Extreme skepticism demands certainty, and certainty is hard to come by, right? Like, it's really hard to be certain that you're not in the Matrix right now. That would be a pretty difficult thing to come by. Whereas healthy skepticism just sort of demands reasons for believing certain things, and then and then tries to assess those reasons, basically determining whether or not those reasons themselves have reasons for them, are justified in any way. Now, when it comes to asking for reasons for a particular belief, we need to recognize a couple of different ways of thinking about how beliefs can be supported by reasons. There's two sort of different pictures that are often given for how support relations, how justification relations actually work. One is sort of a circular picture, and the other is a picture where foundations occur. Circular pictures are usually what are called coherence-based pictures, where the thought is that you have different beliefs, and those beliefs cohere with one another, and so you end up with mutual support for your beliefs on the basis of the fact that those beliefs don't conflict or contradict one another. A foundational approach, on the other hand, takes it that there are some beliefs that are at the bottom, and they confer reasons, support, on all of the other beliefs. The foundational picture then falls under the question, well, what exactly are those basic beliefs, and how do they get supported? Coherence itself falls short of providing adequate justification for the beliefs that we have. And that's just because of the simple fact that many coherent sets of beliefs can be coherent, without being connected to reality. Things like works of fiction can be fully coherent in the sense that they don't conflict, each of the statements doesn't conflict with one another. They don't contradict themselves, right? The story of Harry Potter is totally coherent. You can understand it. There's no parts where it's like, hey, this is just impossible, right? Logically speaking, at least. And because of that, the story is coherent. And so if someone were to sort of have that as their set of beliefs, right, they wouldn't necessarily have beliefs that contradict themselves. But that's not how reality is. So there's got to be something that goes beyond mere coherence. So now, if we accept that there has to be some kind of basic connection to reality that undergirds our beliefs, well, then what exactly is going to count as the reason that we have for holding to those basic beliefs, right? If healthy skepticism tells us to ask for reasons behind each of the beliefs that we have, well, eventually those, the reasons that we have are going to bottom out, right? There's going to be some foundational reasons that we have for believing the things that we have. But what could possibly count as a good foundation for those basic reasons? And there's a few things that have been sort of suggested. And I think all three of them are of interest and worth discussion. And those are perception, intuition, and faith. The first and sort of the most obvious option for what we can base our foundational beliefs on is perception. Of course, perception sort of tells it as it is, as far as we can tell, right? We just see what we see, and so we surely should be able to believe what we see. Now, this doesn't, accommodate for crazy skeptical scenarios. We could, of course, be being fooled by what we see, but we seemingly are in the right for at least believing what we see, because that's sort of, again, as good as it gets. And so anytime someone can point to something that they've seen or that is repeatable, something that is part of experience in the larger context of everyone can experience it, everyone can see it, everyone can perceive it, then that sort of thing should count as, you would think, a good reason for believing it. Now, of course, there is problems with perception, one of which, as seen here, is that perspective often skews perception. And so perception is not perfect, because perception filters through our understanding, and our understanding is often dependent upon how we are situated with respect to what it is that we're perceiving. Perception is also rife with the possibility of illusion. Sort of optical illusions abound even in our own scenarios. With the figure here on the left, it really doesn't look as though the lines are the same length, but they are. It's just a difficulty because of these arrows, the sort of corner perception. You literally see the top line as shorter than the bottom one, but that is a illusion. That is sort of a trick that your mind is playing on you. Similarly, with the figure on the right, the A and B squares are actually of the exact same color, even, same shade and everything, even though it looks, for the life of you, that B is a lighter color than A. And so perception itself cannot, in a way, always be trusted. We need to actually determine, and this is what, the science of perception does, when perception really is accurate and when it isn't. And the funny thing is, we have to use perception itself in order to determine whether or not and when perception is actually accurate or inaccurate. And so, of course, I think in the end, perception is one of our best tools for undergirding what really is true and what isn't, but it's not a perfect tool. Another form of undergirding the basic beliefs that we have is intuition. And intuition gets sort of a bad rap because the term gets used more often than not for something like gut feelings or mystical experiences. But intuition has a more legitimate sense than that. It's important then, I think, to distinguish between the kinds of mystical intuition that certain people think give them knowledge of deep truths about themselves and reality, whereby there's no explanation of how they came by these truths, or they claim in some way that can't really be backed up that the universe caused them to know these truths. And things like what we might call intellectual intuitions, where intellectual intuitions are the kinds of things that we come to know where perception isn't the basis on which we come to know them. There are lots of things like math and logic where we know the truth that 2 + 2 = 4. And, you can see it in your day-to-day life. Of course, using your perception, you can count 4 objects and realize that 2 and 2 is 4. But the fact that we know that 2 and 2 is 4 and that will never change goes in some way beyond our mere perception. We are able to know certain kinds of things, even without being able to explain exactly how and why, because of the workings of our minds in some way. We're able to know these things on the basis of what we might think of as something like intuition or fundamental judgment, without having to appeal to any kind of mystical realm of knowledge. And finally, there's always the realm of what we might think of as faith. And by this, I don't just mean religious faith. We have to have faith in things like science. We have faith, I think, that we aren't actually in the Matrix. Faith is often described as the having of a belief in the absence of having a good reason for believing it. And that may be in some contexts, especially in religious contexts, where people have made it like some kind of vital imperative that you believe that God exists, or that Jesus is the Son of God, or something along those lines, without any evidential basis. However, we might also think of having faith as something more along the lines of having hope. In particular, having hope that a particular judgment or statement or thing is true without actually having a lot of evidence for its truth. This is different than sort of wishful thinking, the kind of thing that might be done by a gambler right at the Vegas tables, hoping that his number comes up next. In this kind of situation, the kind of faith that we might have might be the last resort, at the bottom, for our basic beliefs, where we don't have anything further that we can believe, and yet we seemingly need to take some sort of position on a certain statement in order to continue on with our lives, right? Now, we of course need to be very explicit in what we believe on the basis of mere faith, but that's still something that we can do, I think, right? Take, for instance, my sincere hope that we do not live in the Matrix at the moment. That is something that I don't believe that I can know, with any sort of real level of certainty that we're not in the Matrix. But I do take faith in that belief, that reality is as it seems. Returning then to the sort of issue of what matters when it comes to what we should believe, we again can think, well, if the issue at hand, the subject matter at hand, is high stakes, then we should shoot for good reasons to believe what it is that's true, and we should have those reasons based in perception, because that seems to be our most reliable form of knowledge acquisition at this time. Whereas things that are lower stake, have lower stakes, especially things that have lower stakes for our everyday lives, merely having faith may be adequate. It's not going to change too much one way or the other for us here and now. And on this basis, I think it's worth discussing, or at least mentioning, religious belief as a sort of faith. Now, of course, there are lots of debates that people have over whether or not you need to have a form of religious faith in order to be saved for eternity. But a number of these further beliefs that you must also have faith in. And this is not in order in any way to sort of discount religious faith. Religious faith is fine as long as it's not confused with or mistaken for a form of belief that is backed up in the way that certain other beliefs are, on the basis of certain kinds of things that we can actually perceive. So ultimately, faith just can't really be a form of knowledge, even though it might be something that we ultimately base some of our beliefs on. In order to have knowledge, we are required to have some good reasons, and faith lacks good reasons. It involves, in a sense, hoping. And so things that we, at the foundation, merely have faith in can't ultimately ground things that we know. It's very often quite difficult when introspecting on our own beliefs to trace and determine what underlying support they actually have, especially sometimes very closely held beliefs that one has at the core of one's maybe even identity may well not be supported at all. But what's important in reflecting on what one believes is to determine whether or not those beliefs really matter in the sort of larger context or in the context of one's day-to-day life, how they matter in the sense that whether or not they have effects on yourself or others near you. And if they do, how confident you should be in them given whatever support these beliefs really do have. Next time, we'll be discussing the nature of credences. Given that belief is a sort of binary between whether or not you believe something or don't believe it, right? Confidence in some particular proposition or statement is not binary. You don't have to be fully confident or not confident at all. You can have levels or degrees of confidence in something. And it seems that there are more rules for critical thinking when it comes to determining how sure, how confident you really should be in some particular thing, given the evidence that you actually have. And this brings us to the realm of statistical or probabilistic thinking and the nature of confidence in our thought.